We'll go ahead and get started. We are waiting for
put out the search
one of our panelists,
search party.
infamous Jim Doten, but hopefully he will find us at some point. I want to respect everybody's time, though, in case you have other things you want to go see. So welcome to our panel today. We're focusing the conversation on regional biochar coordination networks. So the kind of format we have today is just some introductions. I've got some big picture questions for our two and hopefully maybe three panelists, and then some specific questions for each panelist, kind of focused on where they are in terms of forming and adopting a regional biochar network. But I will kind of frame the overall goal of the panel, the why are we here, and then we'll do those introductions. So the motivation to have this panel was mainly to share successes, there he is, successes and challenges in forming and running these regional networks. So we are all, the three panelists and myself as moderator, at different points in the sort of spectrum of formalizing these regional networks. Two of us are on the US BI board as well, so not just thinking about what the role of a regional or state network is, but also how does it jive with the overall model and mission of US BI as a national organization. So we're kind of hoping today that two things will happen. One, if you in the audience are interested in forming, starting, being a part of a network, you'll kind of hear how that's gone for all of us, or if you're interested in joining one, or wherever you are kind of in this spectrum, we're hoping to generate some ideas and conversation today as you hear our thoughts on the matter. But also some feedback on how you think these networks can and should integrate with USBI, bearing in mind that kind of the concept behind a regional coordination is to be conveners, to be information providers, to just help the flow of information both on the production and the consumption side of biochar operates within a space. Recognizing that while there are some national scale commercial operations and production, a lot of biochar work happens at a more local level. So can these statewide and regional networks help increase and scale up the pace of adoption of biochar in these spaces? So that's the kind of main motivator of our panel. I did also want to note that USBI does not have predefined regions for biochar, mostly because, as you probably all know fairly well, the different feedstocks and end uses for biochar are many, and so there just isn't a natural way to geographically sort regions for biochar. So that's how I think some of us have created these networks, is they form organically based on demand, either on the production, the consumption side, or both. And it's kind of an ever-changing, ever-moving landscape. Okay, so with that kind of frame for the panel, we'll do some intros. So I'm going to serve as moderator today. My name is Emily Silver. I am at Michigan State University. My day job is a faculty member, but I do research, teaching, and extension. And one of the things that I've been doing for the past couple of years is to support the Great Lakes Biochar Network. So I'll talk more about where we are in the formalization process of the network as the panel goes on. I'm also a USBI board member. So I'll briefly introduce our three panelists, and then they can introduce themselves in greater detail. So we have Jim, obviously, a carbon sequestration program manager at the city of Minneapolis, and also a current USBI board member. So both Jim and I are on the board. Chuck, who's the co-founder of Atlantic Biocarbons and was on the USBI board previously. And then Sam, who's a partner and owner at Carbon Dynamics. And so just in terms of geographies, I'm kind of focusing on the Great Lakes as a broad region. Jim is obviously focused on Minneapolis, Chuck on the Chesapeake Bay, and Sam comes to us from Ohio today. So now I will let each panelist introduce themselves, maybe starting with Chuck, and make sure to pull those mics close. The session is recorded and we all have to get close, and that includes all of you when you come to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it covered it pretty well. I mean, I've been focusing on the Chesapeake Bay watershed probably since 2010. The executive order was signed by President Obama. And the Bay program has been in existence since 1986, but it wasn't really formalized as the Chesapeake Bay getting its designation as a significant resource of the United States. Once that happened, and under the EO, funds started coming in for the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay program. And that's when we started, probably in 2012, research on biochar. For those that might have missed Alexandria's presentation, the Chesapeake Bay is 64,000 square miles. It encompasses 6 states and the District of Columbia. So when we talk about biochar, I mean, it's an enormous scale that we're working at. It's not a city scale. So it's very, very complex. We've had a lot of fits and starts. We started with the Eastern Biochar group. Was going along great and fine, and then it fizzled out, and then we're now trying to scale up biochar through other means to kind of kickstart it. So we're working at a large scale, and it's taking way longer than any of us ever thought. But we keep going forward.
Hi, my name is Jim Doten. You may have seen me up front here. Apologize for a little bit of delay, getting snagged by everybody. But anyways, as Emily had mentioned, I'm the carbon sequestration program manager for the city of Minneapolis. I've been working on biochar since 2012 and started the city program in 2013. We're currently building a biochar production facility. But that's within the city of Minneapolis, and we are working within other local governments to form a coalition within the metropolitan area to cooperate on biochar. However, one of the disparate needs we saw, there's all the voices out in the wilderness talking about biochar and starting to increase in the last few years, and the one thing we didn't have was a unifying voice or ability to communicate as a network. So I founded the Minnesota Biochar Initiative to establish that. And MNBI is basically a network of researchers and academia, say, government regulators, business manufacturers, nonprofits, other stakeholders involved in the development of biochar and the safe development and market implementation, finding uses, research, and basically acting as a resource for biochar in Minnesota. We chose Minnesota. We've talked about it regionally. We have members that are in North Dakota. Actually, Sam participates with us down in Ohio. We have someone else in Maine and down in Atlanta, but we're really trying to unite the voices of that. The main reason Minnesota, because it's the geographic boundaries, we have the similar feedstocks, needs, et cetera, but the other thing is working within the regulatory environment that we have both at the government policy making and at the regulatory level are all defined within set rules in Minnesota, and sort of trying to work with policymakers and other stakeholders to develop this up. How do we develop biochar in Minnesota related to that? So that was the genesis of MNBI, and we've been working quite a bit on that one, and that's one of the things we're looking at. How does that model relate? We've been talking with Emily and the Great Lakes Biochar Network, and how do we interact with that within the Great Lakes as a member of the Great Lakes region? And the one thing that says is bringing together all the stakeholders on the research side, academic side, regulators, business, et cetera. So that's kind of the gist of that. I work for the city of Minneapolis. The city of Minneapolis is the official host city of this place, and it's largely because of our biochar program. And MNBI is the local partner of this conference as well. So we're from all hats, and as well as USBI. Very happy to have everybody here in any way we can help.
All right, thank you. My name's Sam Dunlap, and I am in Cincinnati and working with the city of Cincinnati to bring forth the biochar project. I've been working on that since 2021, and we were one of the 3 Bloomberg Philanthropies grant recipients, along with Minneapolis and Lincoln, Nebraska. And I function as the private operator, or will function as I will have the contract. I have the contract to be a consultant right now. Will evolve into operator once we are up and running. And I'm here on this panel really to represent the early stage of regional coordination, because as the private operator, I am on the outside of the municipality, and I've been struggling a little bit to create this collaborative environment that Jim has been successfully creating here in Minnesota. And so I'm very grateful to be participating in those MNBI calls, because that's been a lot of what I'm doing, is trying to learn from other places to see how they are going about structuring their regional coordination activities and try to patiently wait for the right opportunities to go about doing so in Ohio. And I've been feeling quite as a lone wolf in many ways, and I'm thrilled right now that Tara Lewandowski, the new Agricultural Markets Director for USBI, is a fellow Ohioan. So I think we're going to start putting our heads together to see how we can start building upon this together. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, panelists. So first big question to the panel, and actually Chuck kind of prepared a slide that I think I'll put up now to anchor this conversation, which is who are the right champions for regional network? You know, Jim, you touched a little bit on who's part of MNBI, but just what are our panelists' thoughts on how to build these things? Who needs to be at the table and leading the charge?
I know it's Chuck's slide, but I'm going to jump out and jump in front of him. But anyways, in our site, Minnesota Biochar Initiative, the big thing is to have somebody who's passionate and wants to pick up and start running. I had a number of people within Minnesota ask me about forming this organization, and but they didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity within to continue on, and particularly in the research side as well, and the regulatory side. So having somebody here who has the passion to pick it up and start running, and the first step is the hardest in anything. And after that is that don't make it a lone wolf show, but get those key people in there that have that enthusiasm, can get it going, because the longer term, volunteer organizations burn out. So get this up, get past the enthusiasm stage and start getting structure and start regulating what you're doing there so you have continuity going on. But that's, for us, the key, you know, the members of those key influencers, influencing parts within government, academia, business, stakeholders, et cetera, that was really key in getting that participation across the board. And those key partners set up your structure.
This is going to be kind of a question I'm going to throw at you, Jim, but something Tara and I were talking about yesterday was finding a sort of a parent organization to sort of be the host for, you know, a regional coordination network. And I know you guys have had some evolution of that here in Minnesota, so I was going to see if you could talk about, because it went from one place and now it's at another place, and you guys have had quite the journey there. So a little question on that piece.
Yeah, actually, during this conference, I've been hosting a number of questions and comments on that about how do I do this, and from the Northeast and from other states, Wisconsin, and et cetera. And we've been having that talk within our organization. Where do we draw our particular boundaries instead of just creeping over the border and taking over our general region? But how do we get an overarching group that coordinates? And I know Emily and I have had this discussion at the last board meeting in Denver, and we're talking about this is how to get that organization so that at the next step, not just even overarching across the country, but within an area where you have those common similarities, like the Great Lakes region. We've got a lot that have natural fits, and we need to work together to build synergies. So I see the local or state organization, but then on that a regional organization based on common characteristics, et cetera. And that, but also we're one of the questions we're looking at, how does it relate to an organization like USBI or USBC? And one of the things we're not trying to do, even though our name is totally copied from US Biochar Initiative with MNBI, but we're not trying to be just a mini USBI. They're doing their job. But the one thing is they can't get granular on the issues where we're at. And how do we augment that type of organization? Do we go into chapters of USBI? But even then, I don't think it's a great thing. But that's one thing we're here to puzzle out. Do we set up like other regional chapters to fold in these associated associations? And at that level, how does that coordinate with those national organizations so that we're helping and augmenting each other and not just trying to duplicate or fight over the same ground?
From our standpoint within the Chesapeake Bay, I mean, it's such a big region that we're dealing with, and at state levels, every state does things differently. For us, we're very policy driven, The supply and demand, if there was a demand, the supply would come in, systems would be built. And so it's really very much regulatory driven. Permit, if you have, when you need permits, you have different types of activities that can come to drive the market space. The other aspect too is that when we started back in 2010-12, there was very little research on biochar. So a lot of folks were just like, well, what is this stuff? So where we started was pushing the research first, using all the grant funding that was available to the Chesapeake Bay to start pushing these ideas. But the thing is that I found is that you absolutely need to have a champion somewhere, particularly in the regulatory side. In our case, we had some individuals within EPA Region 3 that jumped on board and were really helping it along until administrative changes, and then they were gone. That's the problem with government. City government, state government, in many ways, is way more stable than you'll ever have in a federal government. So working at the local level with your government is a good way to go, because if you can build champions like Jim in it, it's going to help you at least put a beachfront in and have it at ground level, right? But we did have EPA for a while, and then the research. The private sector will come along, but private sector can move way faster than academics. Academic, you need the data and information to get regulatory agencies to buy into what you're doing, but you're guaranteed a 2 to 3 year process, depending on whether it's a master's degree student or a PhD student. But once you can get that information where the regulatory agencies are comfortable, things start to move along, and they're more willing to be allow for things to happen. Regulatory people are very, very cautious. They have policy, you have all your different silos within government. Most of the time they don't talk to each other, so getting them to talk to each other is even a complex. And so everything moves and grinds at different speeds. Private sector can move quickly. Government does never work quickly, especially as you move up the food chain. And academic, of course, they want to solve a problem or look at problems, so they keep studying, and then they have their paper that says, well, this is what we need to study next, and then next, right? So how do you get that all synced together to get to an end goal, right? And so we've been able to do that through the Chesapeake Bay program by getting, they have a group called the STAC Committee, which is a Science, Technology, and Advisory Committee, I think it is, I don't remember. They're sort of the group that says, hey, innovative ideas, we'll look at it. If we like it, we don't approve anything. It's an academic group, but if they allow you to publish it on the website, that's sort of a say, yeah, we accept this. And so that's where we ended up going, and then we started doing the scaling up biochar. We ended up doing a lot more research on stormwater, because within the Chesapeake Bay, it has to do with nutrients. So you have to take the wins and keep stacking them. That momentum doesn't always flow constantly. We're in a lull right now, waiting to see if we can keep the next phase 2 of scaling up biochar. So you got to have a lot of patience, persistence on where you're trying to go with it. But the local level, like what Jim has been able to do, he's able to put a beachfront in, get the elected officials to buy in, and then get the community and scale from there. I think Sam, being in the private sector, is finding it a bit more challenging because he doesn't have that regulatory or that governmental person who's willing to be the internal champion of that. So you got to find out who you putting on your team to make it happen, and hope that team member doesn't get traded, as has happened with us numerous times, because you're then having to rebuild it, and that slows you down as well. So you're playing chess. The bottom line is, what's your next move to be able to get somebody into checkmate? It's really what you're trying to do ultimately with it. So.
And one of the advantages, again, where we're set up is when we've seen the best success through MMBI is when we have a challenge or a particular challenge to focus on and get a group and working on it as collaborative. Minnesota Department of Transportation is trying to get biochar into use. and get it approved and on specs, et cetera, without a lot of national representation or participation yet. That's coming now with the USBI and what you heard earlier today. But he's like, we need a standard. He needs something to pin on to go. So, all right. We pulled up the University of Minnesota, Natural Resource Research Institute, MnDOT, and some other key players. Let's make something that you can hang your hat on. We have the researchers here, so we have the academic expertise, so it isn't just, well, Jim says this is good. That never goes far. But we were able to do that and get the basis of something that the MnDOT could start working on to start writing those specifications. Now, the work with Chris Hegberg has been doing that you heard about with USBI and the ANSI standards is going along there. USBC is coming along on another one. But it was in the interim, it got things started, and now MnDOT is way ahead of the curve. And we're hoping to be one of the first ones to really start getting biochar out in that, because that's going to be we see a big market maker coming through. So having that drive and building those together, and people see the purpose of the organization. And we're working on some other aspects of that right now. Education and outreach is another one where that brings on out. That's something that the national level, USBI, can't get focused on right now because it would dilute their mission, and they only have certain resources. So we've been working with biochar on site and Great River Greening, et cetera, to do those intros to biochar and get it out and get people used to it, build that market and that demand, that interest, and those people who are going to be your stakeholders or champions in the community that bring up that support for politicians to latch onto. That's it. That part of the huge story, and that working with the U of M and others on that education outreach has been an important part of the component, bringing it on into to develop that up, as well as bringing forward. We did the Biochar Summit, bringing together those people. Monthly, we do what thing called Char Talk. We'll bring in national and international experts once a month to talk about various topics to come together. That's really been a team project that brings relevancy to the organization and bringing it forward and gets us heard by the policymakers and regulators and other agencies around. So that's how we've been doing it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but we were literally we were building the airplane to fly, but we're also having to build the runway to land it at the same time. So we're building the markets and everything else. And these regional associations is a great way to build that enthusiasm within your state or your area. So that's pretty much all I got to say there.
So, okay, speaking of airplanes and runways, one last kind of big question to everybody is, chicken or egg? Is it feedstock or end use that has guided your efforts? Speaking for the Great Lakes region, part of our inspiration to even start the network was what we termed the wood waste problem. We have so much wood and not a lot of things to do with it, so we've turned to all these different markets. So that's a case where the feedstock kind of drives things. But from your perspective, is it both? Is one more important than the other? What's been your experience?
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hog the mic. You can grab it, either one of you. But for us,
have my own.
You have your own. Sam, get over. But anyways, for us, what drove me into biochar, that it was in Afghanistan and seeing a problem with the soil. How do we do this? And that's found this amazing thing called biochar and how I can set up a village level program. Coming back to the Minnesota, it was the same thing. I see problems that could be solved by biochar. And so for me, it was a very distinct end use. Problem being the best feedstock for us was wood. It wasn't available, so I had to bide my time. And the emerald ash borer crisis here drove the opportunity to get access to feedstock. The end use drove it, but the feedstock issue is what actually brought it to life.
Yeah, for us in Cincinnati, it's really about the use case. And, as one of the recipients, as I was thinking about my presentation yesterday, comparing the different municipal projects, Cincinnati feels like a little bit like we're the dog that caught the car. We applied for the grant and then we got it and we're like, oh shit, we got the grant. Okay, now what do we do? It wasn't clear at the time that we applied for it exactly what the project was going to look like. We had to figure that out, and so we're also building the plane while we're trying to take it off here. But it's about one of the things that the Bloomberg grant was kind of unofficially a Stockholm replication grant. And so part of the first phase of that was learning from the folks in Stockholm about how they had used biochar, because it was kind of, at least from most accounts, it's the world's first municipal biochar program. And theirs was really driven by urban tree decline. And so I think there was a lot of identification with that in Cincinnati, because our lead department for the biochar project is, it was really instigated by the Department of Sustainability, but ultimately it's housed in the Parks Department. And so they're charged with caring for all the parkland in the city, but also the urban tree canopy. We have canopy goals, canopy coverage goals, and that is monitored. There's a every 10-year canopy inventory, and there are goals that are established from that to drive more, tree equity, so that the 40% canopy coverage goal is not just concentrated in particular communities. It's experienced universally across the city, and establishing trees in certain urban soils, probably most urban soils, is very challenging. And I know I mentioned this yesterday, but they call the space, the right-of-way between the street and the sidewalk, the death strip. And so the impetus for the project is really about how do we improve conditions in that strip that's what the parks has to work with to meet its objectives and its self-imposed kind of mandate to steward the urban canopy. And so we need to stack all the cards as possible into that deck. And so biochar is part of that solution. And then, because it's the Parks Department, they've got the feedstock. They are caring for those trees. They have a routine maintenance cycle where they're pruning. Every tree sees a pruning cycle. I think it's every 5 years. And they've got contractors that they're working with to do the same work and manage storm debris. So it was really driven by a grant, first of all, and then second of all, by the use case.
Okay.
In use.
Great. Beautiful. Okay, so maybe each of you could comment on what are some of the regional differences that necessitated your focus, whether it be at the state scale or a city scale or a bay scale. So we've talked a little bit about feedstocks and end uses. What about things like demographics, climate, culture? You mentioned regulatory environment. What are some of those defining characteristics?
Wow.
Well, I'm going to just back up for 1 second because I realize I'm in this conversation, I'm very Cincinnati focused, but I'm also working with a partner, Nash Leaf, and we've joined together to form Carbon Dynamics to try to take the municipal biochar program to other municipalities. And so that's looking at that. The local context is obviously a huge part of that. And so our other project right now is in Douglas County, Colorado, and that one is very much it's a feedstock issue. It is a wildfire mitigation project, and it's all about the biomass, getting that liability biomass out. The proposal that we responded to, biochar was not necessary. It was like we had to process biomass, and our solution is biochar, but it didn't have to be. It could have been several other options. So just to throw that in there, I kind of feel remiss to not be mentioning that perspective as well. And then I'm going to back up to remember what your question was, but sorry about that.
Trying to remember myself here. But anyways, in Minnesota, we have a few things. The northern 2/3 are very forested. The southern third is farmland. So we have a few drivers in here on the ag side, Department of Ag and others are looking at that thing, how to help traditional farmers in improving the soil. But it's hard to make great soil greater work. But up north, in northern Minnesota, we have marginal soils. And so we're looking at ways to improve farmland and agriculture. And then also we're the largest turkey producers. We have problems with manure, the horse droppings, turkey droppings, and the ammonia and such like that. So we're looking at bedding issues and such. But one of the big drivers at the state level, this is the regulatory side, is we have a declining timber industry, but we have lots of wood stacking up, We're one of the largest ash populations in the country. We have EAB coming through. But the other things, we have paper mills that have historically driven the economy up north, and those are closing down. And we have a lot of pulpwood and other crops that are coming on out that are now, they're piling up. We have nowhere to put them. Wood mills are filled up and such. So Natural Resource Research Institute, part of the University of Minnesota Duluth, has been exploring that quite a bit, and that's their drive into biochar. And that was one of the key components of forming MNBI, was working with them and the university. Within our environment, what really started it is looking at, I've been running demonstrations for the past 12, 13 years. But within that, on urban applications with stormwater, with urban ag, transportation corridors, urban forestry, all those issues driving that. So we have a plethora of things that come on through on those drivers at the macro level with the forests and kind of getting down. What allowed us to really start working on biochar was actually the change in policies that have been going on in Washington, in that the emphasis on climate and then the de-emphasis on climate. And at the local level, you may have not noticed, but Minneapolis tends to be a fairly progressive town. Our mayor is right there with it, and one of the things we'll be able to convince him is that with that change, then the climate fight has to come down to a local level. This is a great place to start, and this is a great place to kind of inoculate the biochar community and get it going. And whether it be at our level or across the state, now we're a focus or kind of a focus point for people to come and learn about biochar and start scaling it to other places other than the urban environment. But right now, we're trying to emphasize that the fight now has come back down to our level, and we're going to continue doing it because that's where 70% of the effort's going to come from.
I guess you could imagine dealing with the geography, the politics, the regulatory environment of 6 states in the District of Columbia would not be a simple task. The whole Chesapeake Bay program is overseen and laid out. Once President Obama signed that executive order, it pretty much, before there were agreements, and it was sort of loosey-goosey. Every couple years, the governors of that time would come together and sign some commitment to say, oh, we're going to restore the Chesapeake Bay. And only a few states, like Virginia and Maryland, actually put money into it and attempted to do it. Pennsylvania was like, what the hell do we care? We don't have any of the bay in our backyard. You all get all the economics. I could tell you some really interesting stories of meetings in Pennsylvania discussing that, because the people in Pennsylvania did not want to put money into fixing the bay because they didn't feel they got any benefit from it. When the executive order was signed, that put EPA in charge. And EPA then put the program in place to say, thou shalt have a pollution diet, here's your portion, you must meet that, with the goal of hitting it in 2025, which obviously we are not. So with that, it was a very, very collaborative, as government agencies like to do. They had committees and all the different work groups and processes put in place to develop protocols and guidelines, and all the states got involved in saying, yes, we'll do this, no, we're not going to do that, oh, that's too much pressure on our agriculture, oh, that's too much on our urban environments. So there was a lot of that going on, and the program is set up to be understanding of the different needs and geographies of the states. Pennsylvania is critical. Pennsylvania is absolutely critical to the success of the Chesapeake Bay, because the majority of the Susquehanna River and the drainage area is in Pennsylvania. And you have a lot of agriculture in Pennsylvania. We have the Plains sect in there with the Amish and Mennonites, and so there's a lot of challenges in that agricultural space, because it was a point in time where farmers were do not touch. There was a lot of protection on the ag sector. But those days are gone, and then so a lot of money does go into agriculture to try to help with water quality and cover crops and a lot of things like that. But then you have your urban areas. We're very highly urbanized. Maryland is extremely urbanized, as well as DC. So you have a lot of conflicting or challenging things to balance associated with that, and that's EPA's job. And every state has to report their benefits and stuff. So because we're very regulated because of the EPA, that kind of sets the framework how each state has to do things. And there's always been constant shifting and changes on how it's being done. They continually modify protocols as new science comes about. But we have model after model that we have to, I call it environmental bean counting, really, because they're recording every pound of nitrogen reduced, every pound of phosphorus reduced, sediment by the tons, based on the models. And I can tell you the models are not very good because we are not hitting the target, and now we're working on our new TMDL called Beyond 2025 because we missed 2025. And so they're going to be changing up how they approach it on it, and they're going to be adding some other things. There's going to be climate aspects to it, more on climate resiliency from that aspect, and emerging contaminants are also coming in. So it's not going away, but yes, we're very prescriptive because of EPA's involvement.
Okay, so now some specific questions, then we'll open it up for questions and comments in the room. So first one to Jim. I think you've already answered some of my specific questions, so I will ask what lessons you've learned for the role of a network in promoting investment in biochar production as you've done here.
Probably the biggest thing is showing that we have an extensive stakeholder network and that it is a thing. Going at it alone is tough, but getting state agencies, getting universities, getting political leaders behind it, et cetera, all of a sudden it makes it a legitimate thing. And that's what I'd seen as the biggest one, is building those and I've had that lesson taught to me now, is that when you're even building our own project, is that you have to get the stakeholders in there and don't do it alone. And get a diverse group as you can, from grassroots through government, academia, and business. That's the biggest way to do it, and that's how you're gonna build those coalitions to actually pick a project and make that first step.
Okay. And for Sam, what do you see as some opportunities and challenges for building a network, if you so chose to do that in Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, some opportunities. I think as the regional network concept gets more developed, I'm really leaning hard on pulling examples from other places, but I'm looking for opportunities to create kind of peer-to-peer learning. As Jim said, even here as an insider to the city, he's like, don't take Jim's word for it. We need to have these academic partners and these regulatory buy-in. And I feel that sentiment even more so in the Cincinnati context. And so, when I can tap into somebody who has jurisdiction over, stormwater, and they have particular, it's like, as I described with in the talk yesterday, biochar for Cincinnati is not mission critical for any particular thing right now. It's kind of a nice to have. So I'm trying to identify opportunities where there are particular resource management, at least concerns, if not mandates, which department those fall within, and then get some buy-in there, and then by linking up with these other regional networks, can say, hey, I know Dwayne at MnDOT. He's your peer. He's done a lot of research in this space, and he's developing a specification in that, and it's directly pertinent to what you're doing. Let's facilitate some dialogue here. So that's right now where I'm trying to identify opportunities as sort of the, I guess, low-hanging fruit, but that's kind of my tack right now.
Okay. And then, Chuck, what momentum do you think is needed in the Chesapeake Bay area to advance biochar, either adoption, production, you name it?
Well, what we're doing is, as I mentioned, we have a lot of various protocols, manuals that cover the Chesapeake Bay. So we may have a stream restoration manual for getting crediting for it. We have the stormwater BMP manual. So, it says, okay, well, if you do a bioretention without an underdrain versus underdrain, you got this much nutrient credits associated with it. We have impervious acre calculations that back into nutrients, because that's what the bay is all about. And so where we are going is, early on, everybody's like, oh, we got to get biochar as an approved BMP. Well, that process is a 7-year process. So what we did was we pivoted and said, well, how can we get biochar approved for use as an enhancement to existing BMPs? Don't change the BMP, keep it as it is, but how can we use biochar as an enhancement, and what would that enhancement be? How much additional credit would a municipal government get by applying or using biochar? And it would be a very prescriptive sense of saying, you know, here's the spec, which we've been working on the scaling up, for that BMP. And that's the direction we have gone, because then we can add it as a enhancement or addendum to existing protocols that have already been generated. We're going with the low-hanging fruit to kind of crack the door open, and then, of course, once you open it, you blow through it. And we're doing that with engineered media. One, that's a safe way to go. You can very easily define a spec for engineered media that everyone can use. While various municipal governments and state have different recipes for their engineered media, they're all fairly similar to some degree, and then we could add the biochar and provide a spec associated with what biochar to use. That gives some comfort to the regulatory agencies, that gives comfort to those that are having to give crediting to it, and so that's the step we're going with, because a lot of these practices, these BMPs, will be able to stack on each other if we go with that process of just adding biochar as an ingredient to the existing approved BMP. So that's our way of trying to slide it in without a lot of time. And it's still taking years. It's not taking 7, but I can guarantee you, I think we're heading into 3 or 4 years just to make that happen. So it is a slow process.
I was going to just piggyback on that because you're reminding me of something, Chuck. I think part of my attack also is just being patient and looking for the opportunity. And something that's happened over the last year is there's a now green infrastructure working group that's formed in Cincinnati. So I've made sure I'm part of that. And some of the things that are happening there is an inventory of existing GSI infrastructure, or assets that are out there in the community, and then where are opportunities to either enhance those or to put new ones in. And so I'm kind of just the guy wearing the biochar hat in those conversations every single time. But part of my rationale for making sure I'm keeping abreast of what's going on in Chesapeake Bay and Bug and Chuck and Bug and Jim in Minnesota is so that I know about those things that I can then introduce and say, hey, I know that they are working on this engineered media spec in the Chesapeake, and so when the opportunity presents itself in the green stormwater infrastructure working group, then I can introduce that into there and say, okay, now I have a specific solution that is relevant to what we're talking about. So that's another piece of the puzzle for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to running a network a little bit. So when we brought the Great Lakes Biochar Network to life, one of the things we discovered pretty quickly is that it takes resources to do something like this. So we had some internal funding at the university, and we knew there was demand. So we were getting calls like crazy. What is this biochar thing? Can I make biochar? Can I use biochar? Can I use it for this, that, and the other thing? So one thing universities do is they have extension programs to try and field some of these calls and get information out to the people who need it. Some of us can do that if that's part of our day job, but what we found is where the network was most useful is in this convening role to try and connect dots between people and to organize meetings and to disseminate information. All of that takes a lot of time. So that's when we were talking about who's the right champion for these networks, thinking about for whom is it part of their job already, and can they actually carve out whatever that is, a half an FTE, a quarter, whatever it might be, Or is it supported by people who stand to profit, to make money from this sector existing and being well supported? So just for those of you who are out there thinking about, is there a way to be part of this network? Can I start a network? Just a comment that it does take time and resources to do this convening work. To do stakeholder engagement the right way is a pretty time-intensive process. So not just having a champion who's motivated and who cares, but who has the skill set to be constantly connecting those dots. All of these gentlemen are very well connected, and they know who to call when someone has a question, or who to send somebody to when they're in need of getting their biochar tested, or whatever it may be. But just a note on that. Final question
Real
for the
quick,
panel.
I would say that is absolutely critical. The Eastern Biochar Initiative that was formed had funding for a little while to keep that going. But when that funding ended, there weren't the resources, and it just ended up, folding down on it. But then it kind of scaled over into the Chesapeake. But yeah, it takes a lot of time and resources to run these networks. And Jim's been able to do it. It's mainly, let's just say, the government and the city of Minneapolis is helping to support that, or the university. But as a nonprofit, that's a challenge. Everybody wants something for free, but it is not free. It takes time and so if you're going to form something, realize there's either you're going to be giving an awful lot of your time for free, or there's going to be, it needs to be funding to have it.
And Chuck, yeah, that's a great observation. I see Todd in the back there for Great River Greening. He's one of our main guys. Got some people out there doing a lot of the education outreach, and he'll be on field trip number 1 tomorrow. But we're Minnesota Biochar Initiative. So one of the big things is coming through, getting organized, filing the paperwork. We're in the process of being organizing as a 501c3. Finally got our membership together. So we're self-funding ourselves right now, and then looking longer term for other grant opportunities. But even, how do you update that website? Keeping things going, organizing the calendars, taking care of the paperwork as a 501c3. Yeah, it takes a lot. And we're to that point right where now we're standing on our spindly little giraffe legs, baby giraffe legs as I like to call it, and trying to walk on that here. But we're still young, we're still growing and evolving. But we've got a lot of passionate people here to build that on up. But it is hard to get from that stage. We've have offers from other organizations to take this organization over. But they're also assuming now that you can afford to have 2 full-time employees right off the bat. Where does that money come from? And how that is a huge evolutionary gap, coming from a self-funded to getting to that point where you're a professional organization, as opposed to bringing together these interested stakeholders is where right now. So there's room for us to grow, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so then last question to the panel, and then we'll open it up, is given that USBI is in a period of growth and transition, and these networks are in various periods of growth and transition, what are your thoughts on the integration between these smaller chapter networks, whatever you want to call them, and USBI as sort of the national association? What do you see as the future?
I know a lot of organizations that have the national presence with state chapters or regional chapters. I do think that is a healthy way to go, where people are members of a particular chapter. For us, I think it's a little bit of a challenge. We might be a unicorn in a sense of we're based heavily as a watershed, not as a state or a region. Should it be the Mid-Atlantic chapter, again, the Chesapeake, and the states are all very different. So I believe that's one of our challenges, is that we have hot spots in the Chesapeake Bay watershed that are really into biochar, and other areas are just not even on the radar. So I think we're sort of an overlay. But I would say that having a regional chapter of some form that's underneath or part of the USBI. And we had these conversations numerous times with the organization to have a little bit of consistency and support on how to make that happen. So Yeah, I'm a fan for it. I think we would still have the Chesapeake Bay because it's regulatory driven, but still have a chapter.
So, and I know we've had this discussion briefly here, but one of the things I look at it with the chapters, and I've seen other organizations, and the one thing is that it can be very prescriptive for what happens down here, and we have a lot of dynamics happening. My neighborhood doesn't look like anyone else's neighborhood, and that's one of the reasons why we have Minnesota as our geographic boundaries, because then we're dealing with one set of regulatory agencies, not three. And so from that aspect, and we're also handling things that are different, unique to our geographic area, our feedstocks, our terrain, our uses, et cetera. But one of the other things that I've talked to with Miles and others here is that we're also interested in amplifying the message and acting as a conduit for USBI, but not replacing them or becoming a little USBI. We want to get their message out. What I want to do is get down more granular than the USBI is able to down in here and promote the biochar from all scales. And that's the one thing I have with that is directly with the chapter, with that as opposed to some sort of affiliation or unofficial affiliation or recognition that we're working with it as a MOU or whatever you want to say together. And same wise with the Great Lakes Biochar Network, et cetera, linking through the land-grant universities, et cetera, and then down to your area. I do think the one thing we are lacking for is either a super regional area like Northeast or Midwest or whatever, or a national convening, but having some sort of regular quarterly just call in or whatever for organizations to see how we can align templates or deconflict things, learn from each other and start making through and what's working, what's not, and we can adapt best practices. We do need another level on there to compare notes so they aren't just developing independently without regard, but taking feedback from others and adjusting our game. You always take feedback and adjust and repeat as necessary. So that's the one part we are lacking right now is that next level, whether it be intermediary or straight to USBI.
I don't feel like I have a ton of thoughts to contribute to this piece of the conversation, but just one thing that it kind of goes back to me to one of your early questions of what was the driving reason for the project, in a given location, and it seems to me that that there is some regional similarity with that. It's like, is it a feedstock issue? There is regional similarity to that. Is it a regulatory issue? Chesapeake Bay has that in common. So maybe trying to use that. Is it about the use case or is it about the regulatory environment? I guess those maybe are the same thing. Or is it about the resource management issue? That may be a way to help structure the thought as to what makes sense as a region and not just some artificial geographic delineation.
Okay, fantastic. How about all of you out there? So I would invite questions, and if you have feedback on some of these points that we've raised, what makes for the right size network, integration with USBI, those sorts of things, we would just ask that you use the microphone because this session is being recorded, and then we can capture your comments. You can do raise hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Emily. I work for a local nonprofit, and I have two questions. So the first one is, at what stage of project development, or if we're not super far advanced, at what stage would you suggest joining a more formal network? And then also, what would you suggest for fostering a more collaborative instead of competitive environment within that network? Thank you.
You hit on a couple of different topics there that we've given a lot of consideration to. Starting with the last one, with Minnesota Biochar Initiative, I have my own way of doing biochar with the city of Minneapolis. I'm very particular on that. This is what I want. It's based on the end use. But as far as otherwise with MNBI, the one thing is that we are biochar agnostic as far as feedstocks, techniques, or whatever, but we're helping to try to drive the thoughtful and safe and effective biochar market. Because one of the things out there, it's a lot of chaos out there right now because the regulations are out and we're in an exploding environment. And one of the things that we want to avoid is overreach, overpromising, and ended up flopping on the face, because that'll damage everybody, not just the bad actors. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do, is be agnostic, and that's one of the key roles with having academia in there or government in there, because they're not driven by their self-interest, or shouldn't be, with trying to make money. But we also want the industry to succeed. My role in government is not to replace private industry, but to reduce the barriers, show it can be done, and be out there and take that initial risk so that the free enterprise can take over. But we want to make sure it isn't just driven by, and I hate to say the dirty word, like carbon credits, just to make carbon credits and junk biochar. We want to avoid that, and that's what we see in here, is to bring out safe, effective biochar used the right way. And that's the intent of all of our stakeholders, whether it's in their personal interest of making this brand of biochar versus this brand. We all want to make sure that we're doing it properly, correctly, in the right way, and moving the biochar forward as an experience, because is this going to damage all of our members? And that's something that we've come to, the game theory, self-optimize your results in order to make sure everybody wins. That's what we're trying to do. And I try to remember the first part of your question.
What stage of
When's the right
project
time?
development?
I'm sorry.
No.
Chuck wanted to say something. I'll stop him.
No.
But anyways, at the right stage of the thing. For me, it was starting this organization out, or starting the biochar process. I've been working with biochar since 2013 at the city. Had a chance to go to Sweden 2019 and got the enthusiasm up. We just started. But once they come on out there, for me, you have to have an end user. You have to have a market, because right now, build it and they will come. It's a great theory, and hopefully it works. But otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of biochar sitting around and not being used. So for me, I needed to build that runway while I'm building the plane. And that was making that developing those markets, doing the demonstrations, building that enthusiasm, et cetera. And MNBI is part of that, to help my own program get there, because if I can get enthusiastic people, get the wow factor up there and get them moving, it's only going to help me. But we really want to be agnostic on not just promoting our own self-interest, but all biochars, finding the right biochar for the right job, and being okay with that.
I think that's a critical. I can say that in our scaling up biochar, when we had our meetings, we had a lot of producers. Everyone was excited to try to get their biochar into the Chesapeake Bay. We weren't trying to discourage it, but we were also very prescriptive. Again, we're very regulatory driven in protocols. We had the research. University of Delaware has done some of the best research in stormwater activities with biochar. So we knew the metrics that we needed to be successful if we were to start applying biochar into where we targeted first was the engineered media. And so the fact is that there's going to be a spec. And if your biochar can meet that specification, and it's not so refined that it's down to like one producer, right? It's like particle size distribution, surface area, all the things that you test for with your biochar. If you can make your biochar to meet that specification, then it would be able to be utilized in any bid or something that somebody uses. And that's the way all the specifications go with roadways and things like that. So we were very cautious on that front. Now, does that mean, like when we did the stack document, we talked about manure chars, we talked about biosolids chars, we talked about all the benefits that the ag industry could support biochar in the urban environments and vice versa for a circular economy. That is all in the Chesapeake Bay biochar document as a roadmap for the future, but we had to be very careful coming out of the gate on how we started to do it. So we have some very good specifications on the biochars. And so, yeah, we're open to expanding in the future once we can actually get it approved. But at this point, we are trying to be very tight so that we can avoid the Wild Wild West, because if we start having problems with projects, then we're going to have problems advancing biochar. So we want to be very careful about that.
and double down on Chuck there, exactly the same thing. And actually, I mentioned it earlier, just a brief reminder, is with MNBI, one of the first initial roles we did was with MnDOT to develop that up with the University of Minnesota, with the Natural Resource Research Institute, so people with, no dog, no skin in the game or whatever, but have the economic chops to pull out a good product. And so that was one of our key missions originally, was to develop those standards without regard to who's going to get hurt because their biochar doesn't meet the spec or whatever, but to make sure that we have the right stuff in place. And that's one of the roles that I see in a regional organization, is to see that that is in place so we don't end up falling on our face.
Other questions or comments? I'm a university professor. I'll stand here all day.
Do you want to tell us more about the Great Lakes a little bit? Like, just what that coordination is looking like right now?
Yeah, I mean, so we're on. I wrote a grant to keep our network coordinator funded, which was funded. So we're at this point a formal network, but I'm really trying to think about this integration piece. So what is the right scale? We've had 2 different meetings at a municipal level to do more or less what Jim has done in Minneapolis. So I'm thinking about this Great Lakes region as a way to disseminate these templates, these blueprints to cities who are going down this path in various forms, whatever the feedstock is, whatever the end use case is. How do we put these pieces together? So we've got a couple different models we're testing for how to convene all these different players and how to do that efficiently and be supportive and be that sort of neutral third party who can do that. So I'd say it feels like we're just beginning this process for the most part. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I think what I'll do is just wrap it up, and if you want to come talk to anyone and learn more, or talk to us if you're in our regions, we'll have a few minutes for that before you have to go on to your next thing. Any closing comments from our panel?
The only thing I just say is that I hope you do take a look at this as regional associations. And, Emily has done a great job up here with trying to define these networks, and as a professor, is a lot more organized brain than mine. But it's that I'm a civil employee, civil servant, so my check gets paid no matter what. So if you do have want to ask about our experience and such like that, I will help you out as best way I can. I've got nothing in it for me personally, but I just want to make sure you succeed. And if we can help out in some way with your project, that's success for me.
So maybe a round of applause for our panel too. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts.
I would say go to the scalingupbiochar.com.
There you go.
Now put your plug in.